What's going on, guys, and welcome back to episode number 33 of RizzoCast. I'm Steven Rissotto, and we are joined today by a very special guest. He covers the Giants for NBC Sports Bay Area. Alex Pavlovic is here with us. Alex, how you doing? Happy New Year.
I'm good. How are you? Happy New Year to you too.
I'm doing well, and I know MLB free agency is upon us. We'll touch on that in just a second. But before we get to that, I want to ask you about Barry Bonds and the Hall of Fame. The announcement is in a few days, January 26th. This is year number 9 for him on the ballot. What are your expectations for Barry Bonds? And, because I know he's been around the higher 50% range, 60% and such. What are your kind of expectations for him moving forward this year around?
The same as always. I think, what's his name? Ryan Thibodeau does a fantastic job of summing everything up and getting ballots. And I think he had seen that Barry was listed on one extra ballot this year, but was taken off of one ballot. So he's basically a wash, and he always loses a ton of support when they become public or when people's ballots are revealed on the day you mentioned. And so I just think he's going to see something similar, just maybe a little bit of a bump, because so far he's been on 5 of 6 first-time voter ballots. And so he's getting that younger generation, but he's just going to run out of time, I think. And, he needs to get up probably like close to 70% to have a shot next year, just because there's not that many people who are going to change their minds. And he's in a tough spot with just one more year left on the ballot.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to get in this year around. I know Kurt Schilling was pretty close. So you could start voting next year, is that right?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of a secretive process, even from our point of view. Like, I know you have to be a member of the BBWA for 10 years. I'm not sure how it works. Like, I don't know if I'll get an email in October or something, or get the ballot in the mail all of a sudden. But this is my 10th season. So it's been funny for me, because I've always lined up with Bonds, where his last year on the ballot would be my first year able to vote. For me, it's a slam dunk, obviously. But I'm hoping that I get that in the mail later this year and can actually mark him down.
Yeah, hopefully you could get maybe a random ballot showing up at your house, and
Yeah,
you vote
I don't
that
even
way.
know if they have my address, so that's where I'm like, I guess I'll figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. So the Giants finished 2 games under 500 in 2020 in the COVID-shortened 60-game sprint. They were 1 game away from a playoff berth with the expanded format. What are some of the takeaways and the bright spots the organization had from, obviously a much improved year?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and Gabe Kapler does this, so I'm going to do the same thing. He always goes to the coaching staff, and it was guys that, like I just mentioned, I mean, I've been doing this for almost a decade now, and I had literally heard of almost nobody that he hired. I don't know if I had heard of any of them, actually, when I think back on it, in terms of the younger guys. And just seeing them in spring training, it was, eye-opening. Just right away, you could see that it's just little things. I mean, they're much more into technology. Obviously, they're much more into modern methods of training, but just, little things like you no longer have the schedule posted on a cork board. Now it's like on a digital board that's updated constantly throughout the day. It just makes sense in this day and age. I mean, people are getting the schedule updated on their phones as the workout goes on. So it was things like that. And then you see the way they're working with guys and how much energy they were putting in to work with guys. And listening to players during spring training, they were really excited. And then so you go into the season, you don't know how it's going to work out. And I think it's pretty apparent, especially from the hitting side. And I don't want to take anything away from the pitching coaches, because I think they did a good job too. And people were happy to work with them. They didn't have as much to work with. But the hitting side, it was really clear when you see that the kind of season that Brandon Belt has, Brandon Crawford, his bounce back, continued improvement from somebody like Austin Slater, and just overall as a team. I mean, they were legitimately a top 5 offense in the National League, and pretty easily. And that's not at all we've come to expect around here. So that is my main takeaway from the season, that I think they continue to be headed in the right direction. And when we say that, we've always talked about development at the minor league level, but I think the development at the big league level was really exciting. And that's where you can really kind of make up ground a little bit faster. I mean, you're going to have to wait for the prospects, but if you can have somebody like a Mike Yastrzemski, who goes from being pretty good last year to being an MVP candidate, and if you can have everybody else, if guys are going to be jumping their OPS by 100 points, 150 points, and having career years and breakthroughs, I mean, that's how you can make up ground pretty fast.
Yeah, and of course the Giants were 7th in baseball in weighted runs created plus last year. The key phrase we heard, or at least me as an outsider heard in Scottsdale, was the veterans need to buy in. The veterans need to buy in to kind of a new brand of baseball, as you mentioned. It seems like they did buy in, and they had a lot of them had really good years. Brandon Crawford, as you mentioned, Brandon Belt. So is that kind of, I know Brandon Crawford, kind of hit with some of the new hitting coaches a little bit earlier on before spring training. What was from a veteran aspect? What did you get the sense that they learned from these the new coaching staff per se?
Yeah, I think it was just small adjustments. I mean, Crawford's a tough one to figure out because nothing looked like too different, I don't think. Belt to me was just a matter of finally having a coaching staff that really believed in what he does and really said, go out and do what you do. And if that means you strike out looking, you strike out looking. That's fine. I mean, it's not a big deal. So I think they gave him a lot of confidence to do that. And they were selective with playing time with him and found a lot of spots for Wilmer Flores. And so that was huge. It's interesting with the veterans because the flip side of that is like Longoria didn't really see those gains. So in terms of the guys who have been here and guys that we've seen, I mean, Pablo Sandoval had been here. He had an awful year. So we saw gains from them. It was hard to tell a little bit sometimes, like exactly whether that was short season or whether, this was for real. I think a lot of it was for real, but a lot of it too was just a short season sample. And these are guys, who have worn down a little bit over the course of 6 months in previous seasons, and that kind of affects their numbers. So, but I will say to your point, I mean, they bought in and they made adjustments, and it's hard in an environment like this where you're talking to everybody on Zoom, and I don't know that I talked one-on-one with any of these guys during the course of the season, which is where you can usually get a better sense of what's going on to really pinpoint what's going on. But I can just say that they did buy into the new coaching staff and the new manager and the way things were going. I mean, it wasn't always easy. I know Crawford wants to play every day. And some of that was an adjustment for him early on, but they made the changes they had to make. And whether they were subtle and led to subtle improvements in the numbers or huge gains for somebody like Belt, I think that was really important that those guys bought in. I mean, to my previous answer where I talk about the huge gains, I think you're seeing it from a lot of the newcomers, Dickerson, Yastrzemski, guys like that. But the core guys were going to be here for 2 years no matter what after Kapler took over. And the fact that it went from some question, I mean, I had a lot of questions last offseason about what this would mean for Crawford and Belt and Longoria. And they went from those questions to basically being locked into the 2021 lineup. I mean, it tells you a lot about what went on last year.
So I know you worked from home for a lot of the time during the pandemic in 2020, during the season. What were some of the other key differences of covering the Giants during a pandemic? Because I'm sure it's a really weird, but also really unique experience.
Yeah, I mean, first I watched every game at home. Every home game, every road game, I was on the couch and watching Kruk and Kuip, that to me was like the best part of this year. I don't ever really get to listen to them because we're in the press box, but to listen to those guys every night, and I think they were at the top of their game, was really cool. And then just the rest of it, I mean, you just kind of make do and probably a lot more writing over the course of the day. I mean, I didn't miss the commute to the ballpark and getting home at night, so it allows for a lot more during the course of the day. If Gabe Kapler would talk to us at 2:30, like I'm at home, I can write 3 stories if I have to. So I don't have to go back to the press box. I don't have to worry about watching BP or things like that. That was a benefit. I think the downside is we just didn't get to talk to anybody. Off the record, you did a little bit, but I mean, for the most part, we were getting players in group Zooms every day. We're getting the manager in group Zooms every day. They didn't make coaches available to us really, which was, I don't quote them a lot in stories, but I love to talk to a coach before batting practice. I think that's like one of the best times you can learn. And then just not being in the clubhouse. I mean, some of these guys I've covered for a long time and was really interested to see what their actual take would be on what they're seeing and how they feel about the future and how they feel about what's going on. And it's you can't really ask those questions over Zoom when there's 15 people on that call. It's being recorded. These are conversations you have in the dugout before games or before batting practice or in the clubhouse, on the road especially. So a lot of that was missing. I think a lot of the stuff we learned over the course of the year we did not. But it was a weird year for everybody, and ultimately it wasn't. I had some fears going into the year about what it would be like covering the team basically via Zoom and watching on TV, but it ended up being, I think, a lot better than I thought it would be.
Mm-hmm. So let's get back to the current time here. The latest big league signing for the Giants comes courtesy of Kirk Casalli, who backed up Tucker Barnhart in Cincinnati. Makes sense in a lot of ways. Tell me why.
Yeah, I mean, really the only thing he's missing is being a left-handed hitter, which would make him kind of the perfect fit there with Buster. But a guy who had good numbers last year, good on-base percentage, slugged .500. He has some power. He comes cheap, and that's important because they would like Joey Bart to be there at some point. So you don't want to be paying a guy, $6-7 million as your backup catcher when he might not be there the whole year. But just I think a good clubhouse guy, a good defender, gets good grades on pitch framing, which is really important to the staff. And really knew a lot of people and will be an easy fit. And, as a backup catcher, I mean, that's a hard job. You never know who you're going to catch. I mean, sometimes you're a personal catcher, but for the most part, you don't really know how often you'll catch a certain guy. But you have to know the whole staff. So it's tough. And I think he is really a great fit for that role. And somebody, listening to him talk the other day, I mean, he reminded me a lot of Nick Hunley and Stephen Vogt, just as guys who just have that personality that you see from backup catchers. And I hate calling people backup catchers, but I mean, that I think he would tell you he's the same. So, but yeah, it's just, I think he's going to be an easy fit for the clubhouse and also, somebody who has experience with a lot of different roles and has been in the minors a lot in the last few years. So it's not like it's going to be, I think, as awkward as maybe it would be if you had a more established player in that role and Joey Bart was ready.
Yeah, I wasn't going to ask you about Joey Bart because I know you're probably sick of answering that in your mailbags that you do.
I mean, I will say every time we get like Scott or Farhan or somebody, I always say, I hate to ask you about Joey Bart, but we have to ask about Joey Bart. So go ahead.
Well, no, I wasn't going to ask you about Joey Bart because I already know the answer to it. I'm sure a lot of the listeners already know.
Yeah.
But I do want to ask you about Buster Posey, who's coming back for the final year of his deal. We've heard him talk about how special it would be we heard him talk about how special one uniform guys were and how special it will be for him to have that experience. I assume he'd like to retire as a Giant. How will he be used this year, kind of after a year off, is in a, perfect world, 162 games, is 100 games expected out of him behind the dish. And what does his future look like?
Yeah. I mean, if I had to guess, I would probably say like 92, 95, just because he's been around, I think 100 to 110 most of the last few years. He's not a 125 start guy anymore behind the plate, and he's turning 34 in a few months, but he also has had a year off. So they're going to throw him back out there and let him be the opening day catcher and let him be the starting catcher. This staff really believes strongly in rest and making sure guys are getting, that day off when they need it. And not that the previous one didn't, but I think it was a little bit different when Buster was here before. I mean, he was the guy and did not have potentially a Joey on the roster with him. He was a little bit younger. So I think he'll get a little bit more rest than he has in the past. And the reason I would go under 100 is because I do think at some point in the second half, you'll see Joey. And, then it becomes probably more of a timeshare than you have with a traditional backup catcher. But by all indications, he looks great. Everybody I've talked to has seen him at Oracle Park says he looks good. He's excited about next year. He's talked about being excited about coming back. And I think they're going to run him out there a lot early on because this is a team that needs to get off to a good start. And he's their best catcher and somebody that they have a lot of faith in next year. And just to me, it's going to be so important to have him behind the plate. I mean, we saw so many instances this year where it just happened really quickly, especially for guys in the bullpen. I mean, Trevor Gott and Sam Coonrod that last blown save. Those were moments where you kind of look around and go like, man, it'd be great to have Buster jogging out to the pitcher's mound right now to settle this guy down. And maybe he sees something back there that can allow the Giants to get out of this and allow this pitcher to maybe do something different than what he ended up doing. So that's going to be really key. And I think that's why they're going to run him out there a lot the first couple months, especially, it's probably a new staff and bullpen that, again, is not really that experienced. So they're going to need him.
Yeah, for sure. They missed him last year, and I think he's going to provide a nice boost offensively too. And a team that really hit well for the first time in a while. I mean, this was a Giants lineup that, as we mentioned before, went off. So he should, not have a lot of pressure around him.
And to that point, I mean, he might hit sixth. So, this is a guy who has hit third or fourth the whole time, and partially because he had to, and partially because just that's the way it's been. And it was really hard for the previous regime to make huge changes. But he's coming back. He could legitimately hit sixth or seventh for them, and that would be good for both sides.
Yeah, I don't see the big power numbers there. I mean, but that I think that part of his career is kind of over. I see, obviously there's still a chance he could hit 300. I think he's got really good bat to ball skills. So we'll see what happens there. Anthony DeSclafani was also added to the rotation. There still isn't a left-handed starter with the subtraction of Drew Smyly and I guess Andrew Suarez for that matter too. We've seen the Giants linked to John Lester. I saw somebody even say throw Gio Gonzalez's name out there. John Lester didn't get a rose a few years back. I know that's a saying that we often throw around. But
I was standing in that hallway.
How possible is that fit?
I don't think that's happening. I mean, I think, we like to talk about left, right, and there's a reason for it. But at the same time, like you want to go out there and get the best five that you can. And I think people are connecting them to a lot of a lot of these older left-handers just because they're left-handed. And if they can go out and get a good lefty, I mean, there's some guys out there who are intriguing and some guys who are coming off injuries or coming off ineffectiveness, which always makes them a little bit of a fit here. And I think I wouldn't be surprised at all if they go and get one of those guys and bring him in here to have that lefty. But they're not going to go sign a lefty just because he's a lefty. And they're not going to go sign a veteran just to fill that hole. If they have a choice between somebody who hasn't been very good but throws left-handed and another DeSclafani type, they're going to choose the DeSclafani. So I don't buy a lot of what's been out there. I'll just say that about left-handers that have been connected to them. I think their main focus right now is just adding one more guy who has that kind of upside.
Yeah, I think the Rays a few years ago went so many games without starting a left-hander. I think it was starting a left-hander. And that streak was broken, but it went for a while. So we'll see what happens in terms of the Giants rotation. Let's talk about a bat real quick. If they were to add a bat, where would one fit? Because I feel like the outfield's pretty crowded with a lot of, role players, as we saw last year with Darren Ruff and Alex Dickerson. Yastrzemski's pretty much a staple. Where would a bat fit? Because I honestly don't see an opening.
Yeah, I mean, it would be the Jason Boswell role right now. Somebody maybe a Tommy La Stella type who can bat left-handed, can play around the infield, can help Longoria out at third. That's the easy fit. I also think they're not opposed to, if there's somebody who ends up being a great fit, just from a talent perspective, like let's say Jock Peterson, for example, like he is a really good platoon player. He crushes right-handed pitching and has a ton of power and can hit it out of that ballpark. I think he's a great fit for the roster. Now they have 5 outfielders right now, but if it gets down to it and that is kind of the best deal that's out there for him, somebody like that, they're not opposed to that. I mean, they'll figure that out. There are different ways to do this. And, some of these arbitration contracts are not guaranteed. Austin Slater does have an option remaining, even though you don't want to send him back down. He doesn't deserve that. Mauricio Dubon can play the infield. So I think there are ways around it. In an ideal world, you have like that lefty masher who could play third as well and play some second and maybe even play some short just to help him out there. But I think right now their main idea is to go out and get a good left-handed bat. And to me, it's similar to the rotation. It's like you go and get the best player you can and you figure out if it's a bad fit later. But this front office has never been in the position to turn down talent and they'll figure out if they can get a left-handed bat, a left-handed power bat, especially to help that lineup. They always felt like they were one left-handed bat short. So, like, again, you don't want to necessarily go like, hey, they think Vosler's going to be a good player, but you don't want to lean on that when you could get somebody who has a lot more big league experience, and maybe he can't play third, but he's a better fit for the lineup. Yeah,
Jason Vosler, I had him on the podcast the week that he signed. So at least if he makes the roster, I'll have some credibility somewhere. But big picture stuff here real quick. Dodgers are the best team in baseball. Padres just added pieces that could probably put their rotation on an elite level. Giants will have a young talent. Giants will have a young core with talent coming off the books soon. How fun will this National League West be within the next 5-7 years?
Yeah, it's hard for me to look that far down the line and I've been through it with San Diego before, where you see them, it seems like they're going to take the leap and then it craters out. But I think they're built better this time. But I just look down to like 2022, and you follow me on Twitter. I hope I have been honest about where this franchise is and about some of the issues they've had over the last couple of years. But I think I'm cynical in a lot of ways, but I'm also very optimistic about 2022. And I think some of these kids are going to move fast, and some of these kids are really incredible talents and the type we haven't seen here in a decade. So I'm optimistic about what next year is going to look like for the Giants, and especially the year after that. And it does now line up a little bit. I mean, the Dodgers are going to always figure out a way to keep this going, and they're always going to be good because they have Mookie and they have Bellinger, and they have all this young pitching. They'll figure it out. And the Padres now, I mean, they have this window for the next 3 seasons with all these guys under team control, and Tatis is going to be cheap, and they can continue to do things. So to me, I mean, this year is a 2-team race, and it's pretty difficult going into this year, especially with what the Mets just did, for anybody to even think about getting into the wild card race. I think just because those 4 teams at the top of the National League are stacked. But I look to next year, and I think that's going to be really fun and really interesting. And hopefully we have a full house again, or fans are back. And it's going to be a little bit similar to maybe 2009, where you have a young group and you start to see what's coming and what's building. And but then you also are still chasing teams ahead of you. So they're going to be chasing 2 really good teams next year. But I think we're going to start to see some of these guys that we feel like are on par with those players.
Yeah, for sure. I've always wanted to ask you this, and maybe this is a question for the Ken Rosenthals and Jeff Passons of the world, but do you know that people have your notifications on Twitter? Do you whenever you send the send button, do you have that in the back of your mind whenever you tweet?
No, I mean, I never really have in the back of my mind how many people are going to read a tweet, and I think it's bad to think about that, because a lot of times you would probably be like, well, I have all these baseball writers following me. Do I want to send this tweet in the 4th inning of a Tuesday night game? Or you make a joke that's very specific for some people that have been following you maybe for 6 or 7 years. You're gonna be like, I have 10,000 new followers in the last couple of years. Do I want to? Will they get this? So I never think about it from that perspective, but I'm very well aware of it, because at the end of games, and especially at the end of big games and walk-offs, we go straight to just kind of tweeting and straight to there's not a lot of time, or this year it was different, but there's not a lot of time after games to tweet what you want to do about a walk-off and then get down to the clubhouse and start doing your work. So I do it. I move on. I send my story, and without fail, I look down and see 15 people going, thanks for the spoiler. So, and I'm always stay away from, just don't look at Twitter when it's 2 outs in the 9th. But a lot of people have responded with, well, we have your notifications on. So, your phone lights up and you look down and you see that the Giants won, and then you look up at the TV and it happens 20 seconds later. So that has been, for me, I think, where I've learned that lesson.
All right, Alex, I got 3 rapid fire questions for you before we head out here. Real quick, Giants win total in an 162 game season in 2021.
Ooh, I would say 82. I think they were pretty close to 5. They were right at 500 last year. Last year's roster, I think, would have tailed off over the course of 162, and they were running out of pitching there. But they're going to get Buster back. The pitching should be better than it was last year, and I just think they're going to benefit from another year with these guys. And Yeah, that would be my rapid fire answer. Back above 500 for the first time in a while.
Back above 500. So you graduate from scribe to baseball commissioner. What is the one thing you are changing?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I'm changing their social media habits because, we've seen what's happened with the NBA, and I've been on the other side of this where you can't tweet out a video or can't tweet out something, or, we have limits on what we can do. And I think that's a huge mistake, especially for a game that is having a lot of issues keeping people's attention. Like, the fact that they're still cracking down on people who want to tweet out a video of a bat flip, that to me is just a huge mistake.
Yeah. All these rights belong to MLB Advanced Media.
Yep. I've dealt with that.
All right, last one here. Which player, past or present, gives the best interview?
The best interview. That is a really good question. Brandon Belt's the funniest guy I've covered. I'll give him. He is the funniest. He gives. I used to do those end of year quote pieces, and it was like filled with Brandon Belt quotes. The first thing that popped in my head when you asked that actually was I came on the beat in 2012, and that was when Lincecum was really like kind of on the downswing. Mm-hmm. And his sessions with beat reporters on the road sometimes after these bad starts would be 20, 30 minutes and like really introspective and just really digging deep into what was going on and just being brutally honest about it. And I never covered him at his peak, but that was really interesting for me, just covering that. I mean, and just going through those interviews, and Timmy just willing to be completely honest about his struggles on the mound with the beat writers, I thought was really cool. There are guys like Belt, I mean, Jake Peavy, Jeremy Affelt, who have been really funny. Always love talking to George Contos and relievers, but Timmy stands out as like and also because it's Timmy. I mean, he's a superstar, so you don't usually get that from guys at that level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Alex, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy. In this, you warned me before that anything could happen, and I'm glad we had the chance to talk.
Yeah, I think we made it through the half hour, so I'll go check Twitter, but I think we're okay.
2 minutes to spare. We got it.
I think you would have stopped me if they signed somebody. So
yeah,
we're good. Thanks, Steven.
Thanks. I appreciate it. You guys can follow Alex on Twitter at Pavlovic MBCS. And you guys could follow the podcast at RizzoCast on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening, and have an unbelievable day.